And it's just strange. Annie Guthrie, we don't think is staying there anymore, or her husband. We don't know.
Investigators believe they have gathered all the evidence they can from the crime scene, yet tension has persisted among agencies over how information is shared. Retired law enforcement officials, however, paint a different picture. At the center of the controversy is an 8-minute window captured on surveillance footage showing vehicles moving along a back road leading out of Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood at the precise time authorities believe she was taken. This is not rumor. This is documented footage. And it raises a chilling possibility. Could the most critical evidence in one of America's most baffling disappearances be at risk of being lost right under everyone's eyes? The home where Nancy vanished now sits at the heart of a question investigators have yet to answer. An 84-year-old woman disappears in the dead of night. Blood stains her front porch. A security camera is torn from the wall. Her pacemaker stops transmitting at exactly 2:28 a.m. Weeks have passed without a suspect, an arrest, or any clear answers. Adding to the unease, the last person known to have seen Nancy alive, her son-in-law, Tamasoko Kayan, has returned to the house. Not accompanied by law enforcement or forensic teams, but with contractors, drills, new locks, and security systems. Walls are drilled, dust fills the air, and questions are mounting. While the Federal Bureau of Investigation continues to seek the person responsible, could the very crime scene be changing before the investigation is complete? Often, the most revealing part of a mystery is not what is found, but what is lost before it ever can be. It has been 24 days since Nancy was taken from her bed in the dark. Hope persists for a miracle, yet the grim reality remains. She may already be gone. The morning after Nancy's disappearance, investigators entered a home that immediately felt off. Not disheveled or ransacked, but wrong in a way experienced detectives recognize instantly. Blood was visible at the front entrance and across the porch tiles, signaling that a violent act occurred at the threshold. Nearby, they found the broken remains of a doorbell camera mount. The camera itself had been forcibly removed, shards of glass beneath the mount suggesting it may have been smashed during the process. Inside, Nancy's personal items remained untouched. Her medication was in place. Her phone had not been taken. There was no indication she planned to leave. This combination, blood at the entrance, destroyed surveillance, and personal belongings left behind, pointed to a terrifying conclusion. This was not voluntary. She had been forcibly removed. The pacemaker's final signal at 2:28 a.m. marked a critical timestamp, likely capturing the moment events inside the home reached their peak. The house presented another challenge: DNA. Samples collected from various locations included material that did not belong to Nancy or anyone regularly in the home. These foreign traces were sent to CODIS, the FBI's national database, but returned no matches, no criminal record, no identity. The DNA was described as low-level and mixed, meaning it could be from multiple individuals and present in very small amounts, making analysis exceptionally difficult. Investigators also recovered a glove nearly 2 miles from Nancy's home, resembling one worn by a masked figure captured on neighborhood surveillance. DNA testing on the glove also produced no match. Detectives then turned to genetic genealogy, a technique that has solved several high-profile cases, though the process can take weeks or months, depending on the quality of the samples. Even as lab work continued, one question haunted the investigation: who could move through this house in the dark, locate the camera instantly, and disable it with no hesitation? The surveillance footage shows the figure approaching the door with a direct path, as if already familiar with its location. This suggested a troubling possibility. The perpetrator may not have been a stranger. Someone could have known the home, the layout, and the security systems, someone who understood exactly where Nancy would be that night. Compounding this concern, Nancy had been dropped off at home that evening by her son-in-law, Tamasoko Kayan, the last person reported to have seen her alive. Authorities searched his property multiple times, examined his vehicle, and analyzed his digital devices, but no charges were filed, and law enforcement has never named him a suspect. Still, the timing of events continues to cast a long shadow over the investigation. Nancy was dropped off at her home late that evening. Just a few hours later, between 1:47 a.m. and 2:28 a.m., the surveillance system went offline, the pacemaker stopped transmitting, and Nancy disappeared. That roughly 40-minute period inside the house represents the critical window. Investigators believe the intruder may have moved through the property during that time. 40 minutes is substantial in forensic terms. It provides enough opportunity to leave behind fingerprints, hair, fibers, and microscopic trace evidence that cannot be seen with the naked eye, but can later prove decisive. Those subtle clues were exactly what investigators hoped would identify the responsible party. However, as the case entered its third and fourth weeks, an unusual development unfolded. Detectives repeatedly returned to the residence, and drone footage later showed evidence bags being removed nearly a month after the disappearance. That raised concerns among forensic observers. If items were still being collected so late, had the scene truly been fully processed? The question became even more sensitive when, only days after the final evidence was taken out, authorities released the property back to the family. The tape came down, the doors were unlocked, and access was restored, including to the individual who had been the last person publicly reported to see Nancy alive. For nearly a month, the home had been treated as an active crime scene. Federal and local investigators carefully documented every room, collecting fibers, swabbing surfaces, and preserving potential trace evidence. Officials later stated the property had been thoroughly examined and that all necessary material had been gathered. Yet at the same time, key forensic results, including low-level and complex DNA samples, were still being analyzed in laboratories. Advanced genetic genealogy testing can take weeks or even months, and the investigation itself was far from resolved. Shortly after the property was returned, Thomas O'Kane was seen entering the house again. He arrived with contractors and equipment. Workers installed new security systems, mounted cameras, replaced locks, and ran wiring along walls and ceilings. From a safety perspective, the upgrades were understandable given what had occurred. From a forensic perspective, however, construction introduces complications. Drilling into drywall releases dust that spreads across rooms and settles on surfaces where microscopic evidence may still exist. Contractors bring their own biological traces, hair, fibers, skin cells, and tools at additional contact points. For an investigation relying on fragile DNA evidence, such activity can create potential contamination challenges. In a courtroom setting, defense attorneys would likely scrutinize whether the integrity of the scene was preserved before alterations took place. If investigators later identify a suspect through genetic genealogy and present DNA collected from inside the home, questions could arise about chain of custody and scene preservation. Even minor disturbances can become points of contention when evidence is challenged. This location remains central to the case. It is where blood was discovered at the entrance, where the surveillance camera was destroyed, and where investigators believe someone spent nearly 40 minutes moving through the rooms before Nancy vanished. Now, that same environment has been modified, walls drilled, locks replaced, and new equipment installed. Officials maintain that the investigation continues and that releasing the property did not compromise the evidence already secured. Still, critics, including retired investigators and forensic specialists, continue to question the timing. As the case moves deeper into its second month, no arrests have been made and no suspect has been publicly identified. Thousands of hours of video footage are being reviewed, and more than 20,000 tips have been submitted. The masked figure captured near the home remains unknown, and vehicles observed in the area have not been definitively linked to any individual. Meanwhile, forensic experts continue analyzing the collected DNA, attempting to extract usable profiles that could be processed through genetic genealogy. If successful, it could lead to identification. If not, the investigation risks losing momentum. The timeline is being examined again and again, starting with the moment Nancy returned home that night, through the disabling of the camera at 1:47 a.m., and ending with the pacemaker's final transmission at 2:28 a.m. That window remains the most critical segment of the entire case. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker transmitted its final signal before falling silent. Experts consider that period the most critical phase of the entire case. Whoever entered the home appears to have remained inside for approximately 40 minutes, and in forensic terms, that is a significant amount of time. It allows someone to move through rooms, handle objects, touch multiple surfaces, and potentially leave behind trace evidence such as fingerprints, hair strands, and microscopic fibers that may only be detected later through detailed laboratory testing. These factors are why many observers became uneasy about what happened afterward. The property was eventually handed back to the family. Contractors then entered the residence. New security systems were installed, locks were replaced, and cameras were mounted after walls were drilled to support them. Supporters argue that strengthening security was a reasonable and necessary response to a traumatic event. A woman had disappeared from that home in the middle of the night, and additional protective measures were understandable. However, critics question the timing. The investigation remains active. The DNA evidence is still undergoing analysis, and key elements, including the masked individual seen on surveillance footage and the vehicle observed in the area, have not been identified. As a result, the case exists in a difficult position, part ongoing investigation, part unresolved forensic challenge. Authorities maintain that releasing the home did not interfere with the evidence already collected and emphasize that processing had reached a stage where further examination could continue without preserving the property as a sealed scene. Yet doubts persist. If investigators eventually identify a suspect, attention will likely return to one central issue: what occurred inside the house after the crime scene tape was removed. Was every potential trace secured before the property changed? Or could something critical and invisible have been disturbed before scientific analysis was complete? Those questions remain unanswered. Within the timeline of that night, the truth about what happened to Nancy Guthrie is still being sought. The case has evolved beyond a missing person investigation into a broader inquiry marked by unanswered questions. Why the intruder targeted the camera immediately, how they moved through the home with apparent familiarity, and why the scene was released while forensic testing was still ongoing. Timing, evidence, and careful analysis are at the core of this investigation. Federal authorities continue reviewing thousands of hours of footage and examining DNA samples that could eventually reveal who was inside the home. Until those findings produce clarity, the mystery remains open. Public discussion also plays a role. Many people are asking whether the house was released too soon, whether important evidence might have been compromised, or whether answers are still hidden in the details of that critical night. Continued scrutiny and transparency often push investigations forward, because sometimes crucial breakthroughs emerge from persistent questioning and careful review of overlooked facts.